Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Real Estate Mogul MD. My name is Bob Bosick. I'm a retired C-suite executive, and I have the privilege of speaking with medical professionals, high-income earners, and investors. We are here today to share the real-world journeys along with the to-dos and, more importantly, the not-to-dos. It's a real pleasure to have Dr. Scott Cohen with us today. Through earlier discussions, discovered that he's recently transplanted himself from the San Francisco Bay Area up into the Vermont location, beautiful area and location of the country. And it's a real pleasure to have you here. I'm really interested in kind of discussing a little bit about your not-for-profit and what you do there. And I usually like to start, if it's okay with you,
Sure.
talking about your medical journey, when you discovered as a young person that that's what you wanted to do and where you went to medical school.
Well, thank you. So I'm a general pediatrician, and all through junior high and high school, I got jobs as a babysitter. And through college, I ended up being a camp counselor, a swimming instructor specifically. And I've always enjoyed being around kids. And I think it was around 9th or 10th grade where I had an inspiring biology teacher in high school who just really captivated my imagination and my passion for the biological sciences. And I kind of thought it would be cool to combine my desire to have a career that was focused on the welfare and well-being of children and physiology and biology. So I went to medical school at Tufts University in Boston. I graduated in 1989. Mm-hmm. And then I matched at Oakland Children's Hospital in Oakland, California for general pediatric residency.
I'm trying to terrific schools you went to. I'm trying to understand. We're basically the same age given when you graduated, and why I have so much gray hair and you don't. That bothers me a little bit.
You can't see the back of my head, Bob.
This actually began, I remember the first time I heard it, I was 21 years old, sitting in the front seat, and somebody in the back said, "Oh my goodness, you've got gray hair." So it's been a long journey for me. How long? So you've been out of residency for almost 20 years, 25 years?
33 years.
33 years.
Coming up on 34 years, actually. Wow.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, 1992. So 31 years, forgive me, 31 years. Yeah.
Gotcha. And you immediately went into the Bay Area and started practice there?
Yeah. I made all sorts of contacts during residency, and I was offered some very interesting jobs right out of residency, including working in the delivery room and newborn nursery of the county hospital in Oakland. Mm-hmm. And we had medical students in residence there who I precepted. And we had, my passion has always been to sort of focus my energies on the underserved in our community. So we had women who were homeless deliver babies. We had women that were struggling with their medical condition of drug addiction. We had a lot of women who had migrated from other countries. So I worked there for many years part-time. I also worked as a ward attending at Oakland Children's Hospital. And I worked part-time in various outpatient clinics in the Bay Area as well.
I really like hearing when people talk about the underserved. I began my career, first really solid 10, 15 years of my career at a nonprofit, working with adjudicated youth, running group homes and helping at-risk students in school, severely emotionally disturbed students, SED students. And it is not always the most profitable, but it is by far the most rewarding experience of my entire career, without question.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a way early on in our professional career to learn humility and also to recognize in various facets that, all of our humanity is really universal, and we're all
absolutely
really wanting and striving for many of the same things in life.
And I'm very interested in hearing about your not-for-profit, for the reasons that we're talking about now. But and maybe it was my father who I watched very early on, who was a medical doctor also. go across the border frequently into Mexico, right on the border, and would dedicate 48 or 72 hours across a weekend and just be the doctor on call at a clinic. And I would go with him. And that's when I realized I had no interest in being a doctor because blood and what I was seeing didn't work so well. And then he used to go even farther. He went deep into Mexico, south of Guadalajara, up into these mountains where you would take this small plane and go up to these Indians that were very isolated. You'd land the plane and then you went for another 4 or 5 hours hiking in to spend a week with them. And I was always just very impressed and just thought that was pretty cool. And I'm very interested in hearing what you do and the mission of your not-for-profit.
Yeah, so we're called Global Pediatric Alliance. And it was about 21 years ago. I was out of residency for 10 years and I was very single and I had paid off all the high interest student loans. And I had studied tropical medicine and I had already traveled a bit through Guatemala. I had friends there that I would go visit and just travel on my own. And I was making plans to go to the eastern jungle on the side of the Rio Dulce, a river that cuts through a mountainous rainforest region, and it empties into the Caribbean just south of Belize and north of Honduras. And there was a clinic about 5 miles up from the mouth of the river that served indigenous Mayan communities. And I was going to go live there and see patients. And the director of the clinic every few weeks would take a boat into town and email me and basically said, hey, it's great if you're coming, but we have health promoters here. These are trained professionals that are the equivalent of nurse practitioners or physician's assistants, and they have no access to education. So why don't you also implement a pediatric education program, including bedside teaching and weekly lectures? And they had a thatched roof meeting hut on the side of the river. So putting together the syllabus, this idea really got a hold to me. I had been on a few volunteer trips as a pediatrician with surgical groups as a Spanish-speaking preoperative and postoperative person. And that was cool, but those were very expensive trips. And it was sort of a big blast into country, do the work and leave. And I thought, wow, education. And I had already known that there are organized groups of indigenous midwives throughout Latin America and organized groups of health promoters. And I did a little research and realized there's many of them that were hungry for education, just like all of us are that are seeing patients. So in putting together a pediatric curriculum and preparing myself to go live in the jungle for several months, it just got a hold of me. It got a hold of me like this translucent epiphany, like this could be a good idea for a nonprofit. And I was living in Oakland, so San Francisco is replete with nonprofit resources. So for very little money, I was able to quickly learn a lot about the nonprofit world. And within a few months, I came under the umbrella of an existing 501c3, and that's how we started.
There you went.
And there we went. And that was 21 years ago. Yeah.
That's terrific. That's terrific.
So I did go. I lived in the jungle and saw patients, and some of them were like what your father said. Well, we take a boat once a week pretty far up the river and then hike up a 1,500-foot mountain and visit a Mayan village to do a clinic for a day, these big backpacks. And then I went back to that site probably 4 or 5 times with my nonprofit to do educational training conferences.
Very cool.
And we just iterated and evolved from there.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge you faced, and what did you learn from it as you were on this trajectory and on this project?
That's an important question. I think there were a few big challenges. Number one, I had a lot of close friends and acquaintances that thought this was a romantic idea and a cool idea and wanted to help. And I realized that I had a very clear and specific vision, and I had to be extraordinarily selective of who I actually invited in and hired, frankly. The biggest challenge was also part of probably the most important thing I learned. And that's what this is. At least with the indigenous communities, and I would argue with any not-for-profit venture, you have to take a grassroots approach. There are so many organizations from Western Europe and Canada and the US that have gone to Latin America and said, okay, we have this money, we're going to build a clinic. You need to chlorinate the water. You need to teach midwives to recognize hemorrhage. You need to get the right kind of oral rehydration for children with diarrhea. And it doesn't work that way. There are what seem to be very subtle cultural nuances that turn out to be extraordinary pitfalls and barriers that predicate failure to programs if you're not humble and really understand the culture of the indigenous people with whom you're working. Indigenous persons, indigenous communities in Latin America have suffered institutional racism from their own government.
Their own government, that's true.
Yes. Yeah. Institutional misogyny, all of these sort of discriminatory practices for generations. The indigenous communities have an extraordinarily high maternal and infant mortality rate as compared to the country as a whole. If you look at Chiapas, Mexico is the highest indigenous population in the country. It has almost a 10 to 20 times mortality rates than the country as a whole. And the same in Guatemala. So, they don't want indigenous communities in general don't want outsiders coming in. They don't want to trust them. So I had to learn that. And I had to learn you can't just fly in a group of well-meaning midwives and physicians and teach people if they don't really have a say in their curriculum and don't have a say in the programs that you're expanding.
So we ended up very inclusive. Yeah.
Yeah. So we ended up hiring people, and we moved our headquarters to Chiapas, Mexico, and we hired local Mexican people with PhDs in anthropology and gender studies and public health. And they have spent years forming interpersonal relationships on the ground with individual health promoters, individual midwives, making frequent trips into the mountains to visit them, earning their trust so that we can go in and, while maintaining their cultural practices around birth, still teach them Western techniques to recognize danger signs and how to intervene for the mom and the baby safely.
That's terrific. What a well thought out and thoughtful plan. I know that, we all like to believe, and I know you're not suggesting this, but that those learnings come through trial and error and time and missed opportunities. And it's, as a person who has hired tens of thousands of people actually in a companies, it resonates with me that you find out pretty quickly how disciplined you have to become in your hiring processes and really vetting and fleshing out the specific qualities that you're looking for in someone that is more understanding about this for the long haul than a short-term romantic, exercise for themselves. Right.
Right.
And to be thoughtful about the people that they're working with. That's just terrific work. So shifting gears for a second, with you said after about 10 years you had managed to get yourself through your student debt that you had accumulated as a student. It's a common story that I hear when I talk with physicians. In fact, I was at a conference with some physicians in Scottsdale last month, and I'm sitting there talking after the conference before dinner with a young mother and a little baby running around, and her husband was there at the conference as a physician, and they're in Atlanta. He's in residency. They're living in an apartment. They're making $60,000. And he's got $250,000 of debt, And and they're 2 years into a 6 to 8 year process that before they can exit out of that particular lifestyle and go a different direction. So, you tackled your debt issues pretty quickly, it sounds like. And what other ways have you invested in your financial future? Because investing in your future means paying off your debts, and you did that early on. And then what did you then actively do from there on out?
Well, first, let me just say those first 10 years, I sort of tried to live like a resident. I had an old beat up car that worked great. That was all paid off. I lived in an apartment that was in a good neighborhood and was kind of small and suited me just fine. And it was not expensive.
Lived within your means.
I lived within my means. Yes, I lived within my means. And then after that, I wish I had done this sooner, but I found a good certified financial planner who cared about me, not just how much money they were going to make from me, but who cared about me and helped guide my financial investments and guide a lot of my financial sort of overall portfolio, meaning disability insurance, life insurance, those sorts of things as well. And I didn't grow up with much money. I've been working since 6th grade, shoveling driveways or mowing lawns or babysitting, etc. And so it was important to me to have financial stability, quite frankly. And I was working with a lot of people who are uninsured and underinsured. So my salary was not as high as it might have been. So I was fairly disciplined in saving.
That's terrific. Did you get yourself involved in any real estate acquisitions or syndications, anything in that direction?
I did later in life. I'm 60 now. So, yes, I bought a house when I was 42, I think. Mm-hmm. I bought it. Well, the bank bought it with me. But,
yes.
And then I sold it a few years later when I got married, and I just kept saving. My wife was working, and we lived in a tiny house, and then we had 2 kids, and we bought a bigger house. We got into a bigger house, and because the rental market was so good, we were able to keep the original house. We kind of leveraged with a lot of loans.
Got some passive income.
Had a little passive income while the equity was hopefully improving.
That's terrific. And you were in a good area of the country for asset appreciation in real estate, right?
We were, even through the times of 2008, 2009, 2010, when a lot of people suffered quite severely. Those of us who had even a little bit of real estate, that was a good
nice
good
offset.
Buoyancy, nice offset. Yes,
it was.
Yes, and then I'm a little bit of an older dad, and relative to my kids' friends' parents' age, and my kids were born in 2008 and 2010. I'm not a market timer. I'm much more in the ilk of John Bogle, if you will. But I knew that stocks were on sale. So as soon as my kids got a Social Security number, we had a little bit of cash, and we started plugging the 529 accounts, because I knew with an 18-year horizon, things were kind of on sale.
Yes, absolutely.
The index funds.
Yeah, people really struggle with they just, the sky is falling, and it's so counterintuitive to them to go and to buy into a market like that. But I mean, those are once in a generation opportunities, and good for you. Yeah. So if you could go back in time and talk to your 30-year-old self now, what would you tell your 30-year-old self?
I think the first thing I would tell my 30-year-old self, which is, I've been teaching residents for decades, and I've been telling pediatric residents this a lot, is when you're 30 or 31, 32, and you're leaving residency, find a good financial planner and let that woman or that man guide you. If you have a sense they deeply care about your well-being and you trust them, let them guide you, and don't pay attention to all the magazines and TV shows and all this stuff on investing. Just, there's a smart way to do it, and you'll probably have a higher statistical likelihood of coming out ahead when you're 60, 70 years old if you just allow someone to select a good plan for you and stick to it. So I was probably about 10 years. I delayed that. I did a lot of it on my own for 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I would say. And another thing I would say is, you work so hard in getting into medical school and med school itself, and residency is really, really a grind, that I think it's important to make sure you're in a job where you're enjoying the work you're doing and you're making a meaningful connection with every patient. And
that's terrific advice, both on the financial end and then for personal satisfaction and career guidance. It's so often, and I think it's true, I hear it often nowadays from physicians, and they're talking about, physician burnout. And that's, quite candidly, some other industries have spoken of that for long periods of time. I could speak to that as an executive or a former executive. It gets tiresome, and I didn't have the insight as early as I would have liked to be present. When you're at home, and to be present. Because, there's undoubtedly guilt of not being maybe the best husband, father, son, by not being present, sitting there at the table, grinning and nodding at people, but thinking about work. Nobody else really knows it, but you know it. And it sits with you a little bit. And so enjoying what you're doing, I think, is just incredibly important. Knowing what makes you happy. Because I don't think a lot of people, sometimes they don't even take the time to understand, how do I feel? Am I happy? Am I truly happy? Am I just kind of going through the motions here? And why am I going through this? And what am I doing this for? And is it rewarding? And I think that's just terrific advice that you give. And as someone who has lived that in a different industry and came to that realization later than I wish I would have, that resonates with me. So I really think that's great advice.
Wonderful.
Who is someone that maybe our listeners may not know, but they should know that someone that you've read or a mentor or anybody that you like, this person was highly impactful to me?
There's been a few specific people. I don't think I'll mention their names right now, but specific mentors I've had, like, worked side by side with me, seeing patients, and they were much older than I was and mentoring me. But I think it's really great for parents to know. There's a website called healthychildren.org. Like, that is the first place to go if you have a pediatric question.
Okay.
I know it's not a mentor, but I think it's good advice. It is the American Academy of Pediatrics website designed for parents.
Okay.
Not for pediatricians. And so that's one thing. And then the other, there's an author called Richard Louv, Louv.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Louv has talked about which many developmental pediatricians have talked about for decades, which is how important it is for young children to be outdoors and playing, to have child-directed play, but specifically in nature. And now, kids have this nature deficit because our culture is much more based on electronics. And I think Richard Louv has written a few books, one called Last Child in the Woods, another one called The Nature Principle. They're worth checking out from your local library, and if you're a parent, and reading them to get some inspiration. And just that has inspired me to go back to the simplicity of kids just need to play outside under their own direction.
I think that is key. You are really, so I have a pet peeve about electronics, and my kids were in their early teens, when it really began the transition, and I could see how it shaped their social interactions and their developed skill sets, people in a room or not in a room. And the other thing, I had children, a son that was a very good athlete. And so that resulted in travel baseball teams and, junior Olympics and all over the place. And I came to this realization as I was watching him play that the only time he was playing outside was with an organized direction of adults, keeping score, judging them. And what I realized, you either did a great play or you didn't do it right? There's a judgment or a value placed against the performance. And I was thinking to myself, and I remember this very specifically, going, where are the days where we learned how to play? Because I was an athlete, there was no adults around. You learned how to take risk and figured that out on your own, and nobody was making you feel one way or the other. And you learned a joy, and you learned how to, take risk and assume the consequences of what that meant in the context of the game you were playing with others that was of your same age, and the whole game was managed by children. And it is something that is just every single second of a child's life is just organized, right? It's up in the morning, go to school, come home from school, do your work, head to, soccer practice, baseball practice, swimming practice, come home, And it's, there's just not this free time for them to really get out and just be away and just enjoy the experience as a child.
I think there's overwhelming scientific evidence for decades that having that free time that's child-directed, the child is autonomous, and I'm adding to this, outdoors in some type of nature, even if it's the park down the street, even if you live in a very urban setting, but there's a park down the street, you can go there. Sometimes the sport teams are a wonderful way to get the child initiated to be outdoors, because parents I've often will complain, well, I can't get my kid motivated, I can't get my kid outside, she won't go for a walk. But if you sign them up for a sports team, at least there's a structure to that. And then you can mitigate a lot of what you're talking about, because the parents can get together and plan a Sunday afternoon soccer event. And all the parents can do is like manage the table with water and snacks and Band-Aids and throw the big bag of soccer balls out there and set up the orange cones and back off and let the kids figure it out from there. Yeah. I think that's a good strategy.
Sure is. So in wrapping up here, I want to be sensitive to the time that we've had. Where can our listeners find you, find your not-for-profit, and if they want to get engaged or have a discussion with you, connect with you?
Sure. So it's Global Pediatric Alliance.org. It's a gorgeous website. I didn't have anything to do with
but it pleases your eye.
It's I just hired people that knew how to find good web designers. So globalpediatricalliance.org and info@globalpediatricalliance.org is a great way to reach me.
Okay.
I have done sort of ad hoc nonprofit consulting just as a nice thing to do. I've spoken to people launching nonprofits. I've spoken to people that have gotten stuck along the way. Be happy to communicate with anyone that wanted a little bit of just to bounce some ideas around.
Terrific. Well, Dr. Scott Cohen, now from Vermont.
Yes.
Pleasure talking with you. Really
you too.
Enjoyed it. Much of your mission resonates with me, and
good.
I could probably sit and talk to you for hours, but I will be thoughtful and sensitive to your time, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this opportunity, Bob. It's been a joy talking with you as well. Take good care.
Bye-bye.